one from Councillor Bill Granger and one from Dr. Wayne Bilby. Can I have somebody move those? Apologies. Moved by Councillor Hollis, seconded by Councillor Kitty. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against and carried. There is no public forum. Are there any late items? There are no late items. There's no confidential business to be transferred into the open. There is no change to the order of business proposed. Moving to the confirmation of minutes on page 6 of our agenda. Are there any potential amendments to those minutes? Colleagues, inform me now. Councillor Arbery.
I don't believe it's a conflict of interest, but under the advice of one of my colleagues, I will declare that I was a former trustee of Under the Stars and current trustee of Takitimu House.
That's for the minutes or for conflicts of interest for this meeting?
Conflicts of interest for this meeting, sorry.
We'll get to that in 1 second. So in terms of the minutes, can I have a mover for those minutes? Moved by Councillor Salisbury, seconded by Councillor Clout. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Any matters arising? No. Declarations of conflict of interest. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest or declarations of interest? Councillor Arbery.
As I said before.
Thank you very much. We move Councillor Robson.
Yeah, a number of personal donations to organisations working in this area.
Thank you. Business 8.1, page 19, colleagues, if we can move there. We have Rebecca Gallagher, Ariel King and Jeremy Bowes from staff who are going to present the paper to us, and we'll then have the opportunity to ask questions after that presentation.
Good afternoon. The report before you is the deliberations report on the proposal to remove the begging and rough sleeping provisions from the Street Use in Public Places bylaw. As you know, consultation took place between 20th November and 20th of December last year, and that hearings took place on the 29th of January. The submissions that we received have been summarised in the report, which has a number of themes that are outlined in the report. The decision for you today, as outlined by the Chair, is a recommendation to Council to whether or not the Council amends the bylaw. In making that decision, the first consideration is defining what the perceived problem is that you're trying to address with the bylaw. The report outlines this problem as to be the nuisance and other negative impacts of begging and rough sleeping in public places. At page 29 of the agenda, there is the decision tree, which sets out the decisions that we're asking you to make today. And that first decision is whether or not a bylaw is the most appropriate way of addressing the perceived problem. There are alternatives which are set out in the report, and a recommendation is proposed to continue to investigate ways of supporting and resourcing not only our bylaws officers, but as well as continuing to support the support agencies that work with those who are currently experiencing homelessness. If in that determination that you decide that a bylaw is not the most appropriate way of addressing the perceived problem, then the course of action under this would be to remove the begging and rough sleeping provisions from the bylaw. This is outlined as staff's current recommendation. If, however, you decide that a bylaw is the most appropriate, the question therefore is whether or not the wording is the most appropriate form of wording for a bylaw is that does it address the perceived problem. There are options set out in this report with advantages and disadvantages, and they begin from page 30 of the agenda. I'm now open to questions.
Okay, questions, colleagues. Are there any questions of the report to staff? Councillor Clout, you have a question.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rebecca. I looked back at the previous policy committee agenda, and I was trying to find out the number of people who... I found out the number of people who submitted, but it didn't tell me in a very succinct form the percentage of those who were in favour of keeping the current bylaw and those that wanted it revoked. Are you able to give us that percentage, please? Because I couldn't find it in that previous report. Thank you.
The figures are there, top of my head, it was about 281 submitters were in support of keeping the bylaw in its current form. The remaining submitters were either in the neutral column or wanting the bylaw to be revoked.
Thank you. Any further questions? And just a reminder, and Councillor Clout has shown us the exemplary way to do it. For Councillor Baldock's benefit, if you could speak directly into your microphone. Councillor Hollis, question.
So 2 questions. One is I didn't hear the other number. It was 281 and another number. So can we do that first? Just roughly, just ballpark. Not so.
I think it's approximately 96.
So 281 versus 96.
280 and versus 96.
Okay, yeah. The other question is around one of my concerns, which is the Bill of Rights Act, and whether I think I already know that the current bylaw steps all over that, and that means there's some issues. With the amended options, where the behaviour that is being targeted is written clearly, does that blend better with the Bill of Rights and current laws around those particular behaviours?
This is an untested area for bylaws, but with the advice that we've received is that by adding the behaviour, it reduces that risk of it being being more considered to be more of a justified limit on that right. That yes, that wording would be a breach of the Bill of Rights Act due to freedom of expression, but because you are also under the Bill of Rights Act allowed to have justified limitations on that, it could be argued that having these behaviours which are targeted on the behaviour as opposed to the act of begging itself, that it could be considered a justified limit, but there is very limited case law on this, and it is a very grey area. But the advice that we've got seems to be that it would be consistent with the Bill of Rights Act.
Question, Councillor Baldock.
Yes, thank you. If my mic's come through, has it?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes, loud and clear. Okay, just clarifying that, Rebecca. Paragraph 59 of the report says, as a result, clause 20.3, which is the rough sleeping part of it, is not considered to have any implications under the New Zealand Bill of Rights. Just for clarification, is that's the advice that's written there?
Yes, that's correct. It's only in regard, the Bill of Rights Act question is only in regards to the begging provision, not the rough sleeping provision.
Correct. And just a supplementary to that, all we know is that most likely that the Tauranga Housing Advisory Trust would accept the amended version and withdraw their claim. Doesn't mean no one else might, but the advice is that it's probably, because it's using the wording of the Summary Offences Act and just adding in nuisance, it's most likely that that would pass the test as well. Is that correct?
From the conversations I've had with the Trust regarding this, they've said that they would be open to it, and as we have spoken with Shard Lobel of the Tauranga Housing Trust. as
Councillor
spoken-
Baldock, sorry, Councillor Baldock, if you could mute the microphone when we're not hearing from you. We're getting some feedback from other speakers. So when people are responding to your question, if you could mute it, that'd be much appreciated. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting. As
Shard Lobel of the Tauranga Housing Advocacy Group had said at the hearing that the Trust would be open to that, and it's likely that the proceedings would be resolved with that amended wording, but that they would need to confirm that with the Trust. There's obviously a preference towards removal, but they're open to the alternative.
Okay, that satisfied Councillor Baldock's questions. Any further questions from colleagues before we look at a resolution? No questions being indicated. Councillor Hollis has indicated to me earlier that he wishes to move something. Mayor Powell.
Chair, through you, may I ask, has there been an update on begging and rough sleeping activity, most particularly in Greerton, but also in the Tauranga downtown area and perhaps the Mount? Do we know where we stand right here today in February 2020? Thank you.
I don't have the figures of today, but you'll see in the report I've outlined the amount of complaints that we've had, and that is continuing to trend at a similar level of very minimal complaints that we've received.
Question of clarification more than supplementary, if I may, Chair. Continuing to trend downwards, is that?
I wouldn't say downwards, more the same of 3 or 4 complaints.
Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, we're prepared to look at a resolution. Councillor Hollis, you have indicated that you may have something that you wish to move.
Are we doing this in 2 parts?
And do it if you wish. I'm prepared to take things in parts if you're prepared to move something.
If we do it without doing it in parts, then I've got a motion to move down.
You've provided that to the committee secretary so that we can.
Yeah, but it'll be pretty straightforward.
Okay.
They'll get it.
You can do it now. You can do it verbally.
So I'd like to move that the bylaw is the most appropriate way of addressing the problem, and then accept the amendments in option 3 and option 4.
We might just adjourn for a couple of minutes while we address this point. We will adjourn for a couple of minutes, yeah. verbally move what you're putting here, perhaps not word for word, but we've got it up on the screen, but if you could give us a brief summation of what you're moving before you're speaking to it.
So a brief summation is that instead of revoking completely the bylaw is to amend two clauses in it, 20.2 and 20.3, to address the behaviours that we're trying to get rid of perhaps. And 20.2 shall say no person should beg within 5 metres of the public entrance to a retail premise within the defined areas of CBD, Greerton and Mount Maunganui in a manner that is likely to cause a nuisance, intimidation, harassment, alarm or distress to any reasonable person. And also to clause 20.3, no person shall rough sleep within 5 metres of a retail premise within defined areas of CBD, Greerton and Mount Maunganui in such a way as to cause an obstruction of a public way or an entrance to a retail premise.
Thank you, Councillor. I understand there's a seconder for that. Councillor Clout, you're happy to second. Now do you wish to speak to your resolution, Councillor Hollis?
So I thought about this long and hard because part of me dislikes anything that walks on the Bill of Rights Act. So the last wording completely did, and I felt it was indefensible. What I feel this clause or these clauses now do is identify the behaviours that we aren't enjoying terribly much in our city and addresses them in such a way that the agencies that we need to work with, such as the police and the other social agencies that look after the homeless and people that are perhaps impoverished and all of those sorts of things, have got something that we can hang on together with council to actually address the real issues. And it doesn't trample on the human rights of anybody that isn't being a nuisance or an obstruction or being an intimidatory person. Those things can be addressed by the police, and people who are being intimidating can be arrested for their behaviour, which is still appropriate. This bylaw in itself is likely not to do anything else except to bring us all together and focus on what that problem is and defines it in a much better way.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clout is seconded. Do you wish to speak now?
Yes, please. Very succinctly, the fundamental bylaw has been working, and I think that's the key point. We have noticed a reduction in especially problematic begging, which has always been the big issue for the retailers. And you know, I ask myself, who's standing up for the retailers and who's looking after their rights? And so that's why I think a bylaw is an absolute essential. I appreciate the softening of it, and I think that's the best way forward. We don't want to end up in court, as much as personally I would like to see some body take this through to the court system to really challenge the Bill of Rights, because I think the rights of everyday people are really trampled over in the Bill of Rights, which is very ironic, but I believe that's the case. So I'm concerned about the rights of the retailers. I want to see them be able to go about their business, their lawful business, without the harassment that begging particularly impacts on their business, and so I'm certainly supporting this. The other thing is that we know that about 2/3 at least of the submitters were in favour of a bylaw, and so I'm taking that as quite a strong endorsement. So thank you to Councillor Hollis for suggesting this amendment, and I'll be voting for it. Thank you.
Other speakers? Councillor Kitty.
First of all, I'd also like to acknowledge both sides of the debate, and I believe that we as a community need to be able to work with the 40 already established community groups and the central government to make this better. We also need to help the retailers with correct phrasing so that they know that they can ring 111 and exactly what to say to the police. However, it is not our responsibility of the ratepayers, but it is the responsibility of central government to introduce initiatives to solve the rough sleeping and begging. It is not the sole responsibility of the council. It is our job as a council to manage infrastructural needs of our CBD. Our focus is on community and all of the community. This includes the hard workers, the business owners, those who pay their rates and taxes. And I don't want to see them shut up shop because they are too scared to enter their workplace, or they are losing customers to malls because they feel safer there. Last week our Mayor said our city is in fear, and I want our community to feel safe, as they have expressed that they do not. And I also want to see our businesses prosper. Thank you.
Other speakers for or against? Mayor Powell?
Thank you, Chair. I said in context, just to respond to that very quickly, I said our city is living in fear at the moment in relation to gangs, not rough sleepers and beggars. And I think that's abated too, thank goodness, and we'll meet on that later on this evening. In respect of this issue right now, I think it's really important to understand the downward trend. And I think as far as and like many of us here, this has occupied my mind an awful lot, and I've done my own independent research, I've talked with groups, I've talked with senior legal advisors on it, and the downward trend, it is being suggested to me, is in fact that those people who were rough sleeping in the city are now housed. And there is a high correlation, of course, between homelessness and lack of housing. It's not that people on the street want to be on the street necessarily at all. It's just that they can't necessarily find somewhere to live, or at a cost that permits them to be able to do so. And I understand that that is trending down because of that in part. Rough sleepers in Tauranga, I think we've learnt a lot about the issues from people who are expert in this area, need security. And so with the group that I met last week, we are talking in fact right now about opening one of our car parks up at night, as has been done in Auckland and other places very successfully, to ensure that we can provide that security for them and so that they don't have to sleep in the street. And I would make the comment now that there is a great difference, as I think we have discovered during this debate over the last few weeks, between bona fide beggars and organised beggars, which could then stem into the areas of organised crime, who are very aggressive and who the police absolutely should act against. Inspector Paxton, who was in here the other day, and I appreciate I missed that meeting because I was at another police meeting, but I have talked to him since, and he would have told us that they can't police this bylaw. Right, they have no ability to do so, and it would fall back on TCC to do so. Without going into the issues of the Bill of Rights, which worries me hugely, and the legal advice that I've sought from two QCs is that we won't win this. Now, this is not a good argument to put forward here for opposing this bylaw, but it's one that we have to be conscious of because it would be a very expensive fight against the Bill of Rights, one that we will most likely lose, and one that would worry me terribly as a council that we would even seek to take on. Not only from an expense and a ratepayer's imposition in respect of that, but just because we're fighting the Bill of Rights. We're fighting against our most needy. So I have huge empathy for the retailers. I don't believe that the retailers are suffering because of the beggars in the streets. They're suffering because, to be blunt about it, the city had no concurrent plan while it went out, and the large super malls that were created, we know around the world, sucks any downtown area, just sucks it like a vacuum, and we end up having retailers leave the CBD. The vast majority of rough sleepers are in the CBD because it is at the moment a very desolate place to be. That will change, and change soon, in 3 to 5 years. It'll be very different. And so I worry hugely that we are applying a tactical bylaw to a strategic problem. Which leads me to, lastly, my final point is that Mayor Gary Webber and I are pushing the Mural Task Force as fast as we can. I know that members of both the Western Bay Plenty District Council and TC are together scoping the terms of reference for that, and that we will be, we want to get cracking on this as fast as we can to address the strategic problem that could lead to the tactical issues that we see in the CBDs around Tauranga. But I worry hugely about our some of our most vulnerable people being our homeless, that we're not taking a duty of care that we absolutely must, in my view, as a council. I acknowledge retailers, I acknowledge shoppers, a critically important group also to look after, and I acknowledge the weight of the respondents to this issue. But I don't believe this is the solution, and I've said, I think from the outset, that I will not entertain personally tactical solutions without there being hinged to a strategic outcome. So that's where I stand on this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Speaking to it myself personally, I think the history of the drafting of the bylaw was one that was in response to a genuine problem, which was faced by innocent retailers who have been victimised by antisocial behaviour. However, and out of sheer desperation because they were not getting the response that they needed from central government and the organs of central government, they came to council. But I think that we need to realise that we are local government, we are not central government, we don't have the powers and the resources which they have to be able to do this. And so to that end, this bylaw has actually been a distraction. Instead of the pressure going where it needs to on government and resourcing, we've been pretending like we can make a difference, by the bylaw. And as the Mayor has referred to it, the police are unable to enforce this bylaw. It would have to be enforced by Tauranga City Council. Now, we do not have the expertise, nor, in my view, do we have the ability to have staff attending situations in which they're not trained, people with mental health and addiction issues. And for me, page 26, paragraph 52 of the report sums up things very, very well. It says the police, like our enforcement team, need to prioritise their resources. The offending occurring in Greaton and other parts of Tauranga may not be responded to by the police as quickly as members of our community would like, given this lack of resourcing. Due to this delay in attending, council is being asked to fill the gap. The current wording of the bylaw has raised expectations in the community that council are able to address this behaviour in the same manner the police would. However, this is not possible under the current legislative framework, and it's not appropriate for council staff to attend situations for which they are not necessarily trained to address the issues of those who are on the street with mental health and addiction issues. Now, if I take the politics out of it, if I take some of the emotion out of it, and I look at it with as judicious a mindset as I possibly can, as we must do when we are making decisions on bylaws, this is not the most appropriate way of dealing with the issue, and that is the test which we must be satisfied as a council. Politics aside, emotion aside, the test that we must be comfortable with when making a bylaw is this the most appropriate way of dealing with the issue? And of course the answer is no, it is not. Therefore, in my view, we must oppose this particular resolution on the table at this time. And I understand if it fails, there is another councillor who's prepared to move the recommendations in the report. Any further speakers? Councillor Arbery, and then Councillor Baldock.
So my apologies, Chair. I'm going to start with politics and emotion and then slowly lead into this solution at hand. So if, give me a bit of indulgence. I want to share a bit of context about the sub-region because the context for this decision making is important. So as most people will be aware, there is the sub-regional homelessness strategy being developed. So that's happening ahead of the mayoral task force, which is tying into the national homelessness strategy, which is being developed. So this work stream will tie into the mayoral task force, but I think the mayoral task force has a wider gambit or wider remit. So I just want to share some statistics from the draft strategy that has been prepared. I think it's worth each one of us being aware of these statistics because this is the biggest issue facing our region. So, recent counts by Tauranga City Council staff reveal the number of people, and it is up in Auckland. The number of attendees at meal service events being led by groups such as Kai Aroha, He Aroha, Street Kai, Under the Stars continues to grow. The attendees attending the meals come from a wide range of housing and homeless stresses. Most attendees are not rough sleeping. I'll skip a few statistics for brevity. So nationally, 40% of the population are in the two most deprived quintiles. Tauranga reports slightly higher than average levels of deprivation, with 42% living in the two most deprived quintiles. Ministry of Social Development approved 1,135 emergency housing needs grants in Tauranga in September 2019, worth about $1.3 million. Housing costs have increased by 66% since 2014. There are 344 Tauranga households on the social housing waitlist. This is an increase from 119 and 25 respectively in September 2018. So that's more than doubled. 2.5% of the housing stock in Tauranga is social housing, which is well below the national average of 4.5%, a shortfall of 1,700 units. So we'll leave it there. Begging and rough sleeping is in our society because our society is failing people, right? So when my brother and his wife, two young professionals, struggle to find a rental, despite being able to pay above market wages or above market rent, how's someone who's a single mum with 3 kids supposed to find a rental? So we have a whole class of society being pushed into homelessness. Right? Now, begging and rough sleeping, that's the extreme end of that spectrum. If I compare how we grew up, so single mum, 4 boys, minimum wage for a long time until she got qualified. Back then, she was able to work long hours and put a roof over our heads. Same family in the same situation, they'd be on a social housing register waiting list to get into a house. We'd be living in hotels. I probably wouldn't be able to keep up with my homework, dealing with other stresses, and wouldn't have been given the same opportunities. There's a whole proportion of society having the rug pulled out from under them. So we have a broken society, and people get uncomfortable when people ask them for money because I think that confronts them a little bit. So I know Tauranga is seen to be a great place to live. You know, we've got beautiful beaches, beautiful landscape. But if you don't bump into poverty, you're living in a bubble. And if it's only the beggars and the homeless that you're seeing, that's a small part of the proportion, and I really think you need to meet your neighbours. So, on to the discussion that we're at hand. That's the context we're making decisions within. The 11 of us are not the right group to come up with solutions for homelessness, rough sleeping, begging, because we don't have the expertise, right? We have staff who are tied in and working collaboratively with Western Bay of Plenty District Council, Te Puni Kukuri, MSD, the police, DHB, Whina House, Tauranga Moana Men's Night Shelter, so on and so forth. So rather than us coming up with a solution in isolation of the staff and isolation of expert advice, I really think we should be asking them, hey, we have this issue of begging and rough sleeping, what would you suggest is a good solution? So I don't believe that this bylaw is the right solution. It doesn't address the begging and rough sleeping issues that we're seeing in Gate Pa, for example. Without preempting what solutions might be put forward to us, I'd suggest things like street ambassadors would be a better approach, or supporting the People's Project would be a better use of our money and resources. I think we're all after the same thing. We all want to see streets that are where we don't get confronted with this poverty, but a bylaw is not the best way to get that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Baldock. Councillor Baldock.
Yes, just waiting for the microphone to turn on. Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Yes. Great. Look, I heard once that politics was the art of compromise, and I thank Councillor Hollis and Councillor Kitty and Clout for supporting this compromised approach to it. I think it's very clear in the report, particularly paragraph 29, that since the bylaw was passed, Council has not sat back on its hands and expected the bylaw to fix everything. We have actually assisted with the Whina House, with the People's Project, Tauranga Housing Community Trust doing the good work, Takitimu House. I'm not quite sure why Tuturum Whānau's not mentioned in that list, but they certainly are continuing to meet needs in our community and could be, and should be complimented for that. The facts are that no one has been harmed from this bylaw. There has no one been fined, dragged into jail. It hasn't caused more homelessness, nor more rough sleeping, nor has it led to more begging. But it does appear to have contributed to an improvement in the situation in some places. We've heard that consistently and through the submission. We only have 2 enforcement bylaw officers who take care of liquor, take care of freedom camping and so on. They are not running around providing monitoring of this all the time. So I'm disturbed that we can't accept this compromise wording that achieves the issues relating to the New Zealand Bill of Rights. What seems to be a sticking point for some people is the Local Government Act, which requires us to be sure that this is the most appropriate means of addressing it. In other words, a silver bullet. And of course, silver bullets don't exist. And I can assure my colleagues that when the Local Government Act was passed, and I was on the Select Committee at the time, none of us around the Select Committee, when we used that word most, intended it to be interpreted as though it was the only thing we were doing to address a problem. And that this is the problem sometimes with the English language and sometimes with what happens with interpretation of laws through the courts and so on. I think it is still an appropriate way for us to address the problem. It is not the only way we should address it, but it has a value and a use, and I believe we've seen that demonstrated. We've certainly heard from the community an overwhelming support of continuing the bylaw, and most of those are prepared to accept the amended version because it will still send a useful message to the community and has empowered citizens themselves, the retailers, to simply step outside their shop and say, excuse me, but there is a bylaw, you can't do this within 5 metres of my entranceway, would you please move? There's no way we're going to rely on the police to come to every incident and deal with this. And whilst I support doing everything we possibly can with the problems we have in our city, they will not go away overnight. It will take a long strategy. The cost of housing in our city, the lack of rental and homeless problem. And I believe we should leave the bylaw in its amended form in place until we can actually honestly say to our community, because the legal type, the harassing type of begging comes and goes in seasons, and we will be left without any instrument to address it if we revoke the bylaw today and go back to where we were probably 18 months ago. So I certainly support the motion that's before us. I shall wait to see how other members speak to it and vote. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you,
I
Councillor.
will turn my microphone off now.
Other speakers? Councillor Robson.
I'm a little bit less committed to a technocracy than some might infer Councillor Arbery is. The idea that it's not for us to make the decisions, we should in fact be guided by experts, because my experience is, as in so many things, expertise of an advisor is something that one has to judge. So you don't remove the need for considered judgment by hiring experts, because you have to determine what their level of expertise is. So I'm nervous about the argument that this is not a decision for us to make, or we should effectively just tick a decision that's recommended by a particular group of people who claim, perhaps validly, that they have the expertise. Conversely, I'm not persuaded at all by the idea that we should do something because something needs to be done, when on closer examination, that thing which we are urged to do would not appear to have standing. We've got to a point now where effectively we are replicating the Summary Offences Act with the addition of one word. There's no difference here. The failure, when I reflect on the Greerton situation, and let's be honest, this has been prompted by particular circumstance in Greerton of a relatively short duration. If one looks at the history of the city, I arrived here in 2003. This problem actually occupies a very short period of time. I believe we overreacted to the problem. I don't believe we gave it due consideration. I believe we were motivated by good intent, but rather than pausing and getting a rounded set of views and then listening to that advice, I believe that a number of us, as I say, with good intent, sought to effectively provide a solution. The advice we've since received actually repeats the earlier advice. We're actually in no different situation than we were originally. The only difference is that the immediacy of the issue has gone. Now, the supporters of the original bylaw claim that that's a result of the bylaw, but there is no evidence for that. And we would be remiss to assume causality without strong evidence. We've had submissions directly. The mayor has referred to advice he's received from the police. We've had advice from legal experts. We've had advice from people working in the social sector. And the majority of that advice is the bylaw is not the answer from so many dimensions. Make two other observations. One is the homeless, those disadvantaged people that Councillor Arbery so rightly reminds us of have been failed by wider society, failed by central government. They've had little voice in this conversation, and that worries me somewhat. And the second thing that worries me is when I hear councillors invoking the numbers game to get their particular preferred solution through, when those very councillors have probably within the recent past argued vehemently that these things must never be numbers game, that it's about doing the right thing. And in this respect, I think doing the right thing does not include using a bylaw.
Final call for other speakers. Councillor Hughes.
I'm going to keep it relatively short. I don't think the begging ban is the most appropriate way to address this problem. I'm a great believer in positive solutions involving community and involving everyone. And I can see by what's happening with the task force, what's happening with the stakeholder groups that's coming together to address this problem, that we are on a journey, and I feel like every day we can only get closer to better solutions. So I feel that the begging ban is even though it's a piece of a solution, it's actually a negative solution for some members of the community, and I would like to see where there was positive solutions for all, and I think we can get there together. So I won't be supporting the ban.
Thank you. If there are no further speakers, Councillor Hollis, do you wish to exercise a right of reply?
There still seems to be a conflation between homeless, rough sleeping and begging, and combining that with the intimidatory and predatory behaviour shown on occasion in the city. This isn't a begging ban. We're not intending to stop people from begging, and to think that shows that perhaps the clauses haven't been well understood. It's not intended, this amendment is not intended to fix the problem and solve the homeless issue that we have in this city, and it is not intended to stop people begging or to declutter our streets from piles of smelly blankets and such. It is intended to allow our retailers, shoppers and residents, that they can have confidence in us as a council for at least implementing things that make some sense to bring these sorts of issues to light. We've got a group of ratepayers that want our help against a group of criminal locals that the police will not address, the criminals that probably aren't ratepayers, and we've got very few tools that can do that for them. To suggest that this is just a tactical solution, or that tactical solutions have no part in this issue, and that a strategic solution is required is also false. Perhaps if we had a strategy, then tactical solutions wouldn't be needed for us to discuss. Looking after our ratepayers is surely our number one issue. And to suggest that it isn't enforceable is not true. What it actually does is it gives our ratepayers and our retailers the wording that they need to give to police to get someone to their site to remove these predators. Without that wording, the police can't do anything. If they say there's somebody sitting on the floor outside their shop, that is unenforceable. But if somebody is intimidating Granny at the ATM, it surely is. It lines up nicely with the Crimes Act. That it doubles up is a non sequitur. It just doesn't matter. This is just another tool in the toolbox, but without it, nothing else will focus. I just want to repeat that it is not designed to fix the homelessness issue. That is not what this is. It is not a begging ban. It is not a homeless person ban. It is there to stop the behaviours that we don't want. The predatory, intimidatory and obstructing behaviours that exist in the city that are illegal. These behaviours are illegal. Begging is not, and that's not what this says. It is not a begging ban. It is designed to give confidence to our ratepayers that we are there to look after their interests. This amended solution, this amended bylaw is not the solution, but it is the most important thing that we can do as council is to show our community that we care for them and give us time to allow strategic solutions to come into play.
Thank you, Councillor. Having exercised your right of reply, I will put the motion. Those in favour, please say aye and raise your hands. That is Councillor Baldock, Councillor Hollis, Councillor Kitty and Councillor Clout. Those against, Councillor Morris, Councillor Salisbury, Councillor Arbery, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Robson and Mayor Powell. I declare that motion is not carried. Councillor Arbery, you have indicated that you wish to move the recommendations. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do we have a seconder for that course of action? Seconded by Councillor Robson. Councillor Arbery, do you wish to speak?
Only very quickly, just to say that I think we're representing all our residents, not just the ones wealthy enough to afford to pay rates.
Seconder, Councillor Robson, do you wish to speak now?
Reserve.
Robson is reserved. Any other speakers to the recommendation? Mayor Powell and then Councillor Clout.
Thank you, Chair. I disagree that this is an issue for ratepayers. This is an issue for retailers, because I've spoken to many ratepayers who are very opposed to this law, but they don't have retail shops in either of the three downtown areas of concern. So I think we need to be very careful about how we couch this and understand that this is a very specific problem in a very specific area. And I'm very conscious that ahead of today's meeting, all these things could morph into one, that people are fearful of a whole range of things. I think we need to be very clear that this is a safe environment that we live in Tauranga Moana, Chair, and while we have spates of, at the moment, violence, and we've seen some unrest in various other areas, we live in a very safe community in the main, and we are working hard both strategically and tactically to manage those issues as they confront us, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you. Councillor Clout.
Thank you. I just want to first of all acknowledge the presence of Sally Benning here from the Greaton Village Association. So thank you, Sally, for coming along. And of course, Councillor Malloy, who began this journey several years ago. We've spent years actually trying to develop a strategic approach, and I applaud the fact that we are doing that again in a revised way under Mayor Powell and also Mayor Webber. So I applaud that, and I do hope the strategic approach will yield good fruit. But in the meantime, this is a tactical tool, and I believe it's something we should. The bylaw is a tactical tool, and I would hate to see it revoked. New Zealand is a first world country, let's not deny it, and we have a massive social welfare system which could and should undergird every person's needs in this society. I know that many people would say that it's not enough. We also have at least 40 different community groups that are supporting people who have fallen on really hard times. So what I'm saying is there's no real excuse for any single person to have to sit on the sidewalk and put their hand out begging for a few coins here and there. There's no need for it, and we should not be tolerating it, in my view. We've said that this is not a silver bullet, but in the words of former Councillor Terry Malloy, it is a tool in the toolbox and something that we should have kept. So I'll be voting against this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll speak to it now. I'd just like to remind members that when making a bylaw, the test is that this has to be the most appropriate way of dealing with the issue, not an appropriate way of dealing with the issue. It has to be the most appropriate way of dealing with the issue. It can't be just a tool in the toolbox. It must be the best tool in the toolbox, and it's my view that it's not. Therefore, I'm supporting this resolution. Other speakers? Councillor Salisbury.
So I also agree that we represent the residents and ratepayers of our city, and I do believe our city needs compassionate ways of dealing with things, and not just these ones that can appear to be punitive. And I understand a lot of work has been done in this area, and we are seeing a reduction in begging across the city, not just in the 3 areas that this applies. So the main problem, as I understand it, is criminal in nature, which is a police matter, not a council matter. And I also do want our retailers, the public, to be safe about their business, and I believe all are valuable in our city. But I do not believe that this bylaw is the most appropriate way of addressing the problem. And I think that a more positive and appropriate way would be for us to support and facilitate the ongoing work of the experts and agencies in this field to find better solutions.
Thank you. Other speakers? Councillor Hollis, you haven't spoken to it yet. Yes.
There still seems to be a conflation, and it is very much a case of letting the people who have this issue of criminality in their area of work, or where they are, their places, if you like, have the perception that we care. At the moment, if we revoke this bylaw, what we will be saying to those groups of people who are desperate to have a council that cares is that we don't, that we care more for the homeless and those criminals that are doing things illegally than we care for our retailers and our ratepayers. And to suggest that our residents aren't fearful in Greerton is just nonsense.
Other speakers? Councillor Baldock. Councillor Baldock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just some brief comments. I welcome the comments made by the Mayor about investigating using perhaps one of our car parking buildings as a means of providing some wraparound services for the rough sleepers. And I made available to all of my colleagues some videos I took when I visited the place in Brisbane which does this. But it was to my surprise when I spoke to the gentleman behind it all about what might be the case in Brisbane, and it was told that of course it's illegal to beg in Brisbane anywhere at any time, and the police act upon that very quickly. That's because the international evidence of begging is that it is never positive. We have in this welfare society we live in plenty of opportunities for people who need help to get help, and allowing people to take money from people, generally unsuspecting people in the streets who feel the need to reach out and put money in their hands, is never a good solution for the beggar. And we should have had the courage, I think, to stick to that. It doesn't help them, My daughter, who works at the front lines of the Salvation Army, helping the homeless and so on, says, you know, the feeding of people in all these wonderful charities that are doing Milo at night and meals here and there, it is not addressing the core issue, which the police inspector made clear to us the other day. Most people have mental health issues, and we need more and more to address those real serious issues. And for some of them who choose to beg, they simply end up with resources to further the bad habits they have, the drug addictions, the drink problems. And we should underpin that message with the bylaw, and I won't be supporting revocation. Thank you.
Thank you. Final call for speakers before I invite Councillor Arbery to give his right of reply. Councillor Robson as seconder, you wish to exercise your seconding now.
Yeah, I think the conflation argument used by Councillor Hollis has some validity. I think we need to bring a degree of Occam's razor to this. We need to bring a degree of precision to the discussion. So I'd just like to comment on the following. Begging, that is soliciting money without offering something in return effectively, can be enormously beneficial to society. It's why I donate to people like the SPCA when they see me in the street and ask for money, whatever it might be. So the issue with regard to begging is not the requesting money, it's the nature or style of the interaction. It is intimidatory. And that, as Councillor Hollis reminds us, is actually a legal issue. The Summary Offences Act is the means by which it can be addressed. If there is a failure here locally, it is a failure of our police to prioritise addressing this issue ahead of others. And in our search for reciprocity and collaboration and kotahitanga, which is a phrase that now trips off a number of politicians' lips, I think we have to demand that reciprocity from some other organisations in this city. When they have an issue, we leap to their assistance by shutting down roads and guiding people round their issue to optimise their ability to do what they do. I believe that when we request the support of the police to address a particular issue in our community, they should react with alacrity rather than telling us they have higher priorities. That being the case, if it is such that in their prioritisation they don't have the resources, they and we should look to the same source issue. The social are, to a certain extent, unable to be addressed locally because we are not resourced to do these things. We do not have those defined responsibilities under the Local Government Act. We have the loose description of the four well-beings. But unlike some other countries where local government are tasked with health or education or social housing, we don't have that. We have Kaingaroa to provide housing. We have DHBs to provide health. We have local police forces to provide police, all funded not by ratepayers but by central government. If central government is failing to fund these services properly, that's where we should be directing our ire. We should not be, how can I put it? Well, let me quote Councillor Hollis, giving the perception that we care, because that is not what we're about. We're about outcomes, not perceptions. Too often politicians play to perceptions, but we need to have more integrity than that. We need to play to outcomes. And the truth is, central government is failing the people of this country at the bottom. And the truth is, it appears they are failing our local police force by not providing with the resources they need to address real issues in our community. And I'm not denying that in Greaton, for a short period of time, there was a real issue which the police didn't address. But I think we need to be clear where the buck stops. And I also think we need to have the courage to point it out. Right? So rather than spend an enormous amount of time and energy, right, debating a bylaw which is about making you believe that we care, I believe we should be standing alongside the people in our community and telling central government what they're doing is not enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arbery, do you wish to exercise your right of reply?
Yes. Just very quickly, Councillor Clout mentioned that there's no excuse for someone to be begging on the side of the street. They should take personal responsibility. I just suggest that any person, even Councillor Clout, could have a psychotic breakdown tomorrow and find himself begging on the street in 3 months' time.
I will put the resolution. Those in favour, please say aye and raise your hands. Councillor Morris, Councillor Salisbury, Councillor Arbery, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Robson, Mayor Temby Powell. I declare the motion carried. So what will happen now, folks, is that this will go to council for council to decide to confirm it. And that will be, I believe, next week. Yes, Councillor.
You recording those opposed?
I did. Thank you, Councillor Baldock. And those opposed, please raise your hands. Opposed. Those opposed, Councillor Clout, Councillor Kitty, Councillor Hollis, and for the record, Councillor Baldock. Thank you. So what will happen now is this will come to council next week, I believe, for it to be confirmed, and that will be the actual time when a bylaw is revoked or not. This committee does not have the power to do that. I'd like to thank members for the way in which they've conducted themselves in a very what can be an emotional debate, and I'd like to thank our submitters for letting us know very clearly from their experience on both sides of the debate. There's no late items, so I therefore declare the meeting closed. Thank you, colleagues, thank you, staff, and thank you, members of the public, and thank you, Sam from Bay Plenty Times. So this meeting is closed, and in approximately 10 minutes,